I'm excited about this episode of the Elite Recruiter podcast because as a recruiter, you need to evolve to become a profit center. You need to evolve to make sure that you are a revenue generator. You need to be a true business partner to be able to successfully help your clients grow their organizations and grow their teams. And to talk about that, I have my specialist with me, Justin Wade, to talk about everything and how to evolve from just a normal recruiter to a modern day recruiter. So, Justin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I want to put you on the spot. I'm so excited that to be on this podcast. One of the things I think I said this in the past. This is exactly what I was looking for when I first started out in recruiting, and the fact that you're just dropping nuggets and having some of the most incredible recruiters on this podcast. So thank you so much.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. But I tried to make the podcast for person that's looking to grow and looking to change and looking to evolve to make more placements, make more money, and set their families up. So, but yeah, awesome. Well, Justin, first question as always, how did you even get started in the recruiting industry?
I was a late bloomer or maybe a late incomer, I would say. I originally started in retail sales. And then I remember someone told me, they're like, you should be selling something more expensive. And I ended up selling facial plastic surgery is something that I sold for a while. And I realized that I wanted to do something with a bit more impact. Went in to become a personal trainer and group fitness instructor. And there I met Miss Masa Walker. She was a recruiter. I trained her for years. And for years, she was like, you have to be a recruiter. You have to be a recruiter. You would do so great as a recruiter. And I was like, yeah, whatever. And one day life changed. I was going through a breakup and I called her up. I was like, hey, I think I want to be a recruiter. The next day I had an interview. It went that fast. And from there, I actually went into the healthcare space, talk about like Allegis Group, like getting your teeth knocked in basically over and over. But you learn some amazing fundamentals, right? And you get hardened is a good way to put it. And what was really cool about it was I'm in the Seattle area, and I really wanted to sort of pivot into the tech space, and was able to do that after some time. But yeah, it probably was easier than you could imagine because it was just a phone call for me.
Well, I mean, there was also like the years of the seeds being planted, like you should be a recruiter, you should be a recruiter. And now you are the head of talent acquisition at Flawless. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll give you a little brief history about Flawless. It started with us being a contingent firm back in a little WeWork downtown Seattle. We were specializing in kind of early stage startup, the ecosystem, I guess, in the Seattle market. And COVID hit, like right around 2020, and all of a sudden we're like, well, what do we do now? And so we pulled back. And I think just like with everyone, all of a sudden business just started booming. And one of the biggest things that we identified, when I say we, I have to give Anders a lot of credit, who's the founder of the company. We noticed that there was a demand for other services besides just the traditional contingent model. And so over the last 4 years, we've actually sort of evolved further and further and further to be sort of a solution for many of our clients. But what ended up happening, let's call it like an embedded model is a good way to put it. So with a monthly cost associated to it per resource, and then usually on the back end having some sort of, let's call them account manager or an additional like a support system to really get to really build out those companies. And originally we started with let's call them early stage startups, anything from seed through Series C. And then as that was building, we started getting a lot of demand from enterprise clients as well. And so I was able to uh, diversify, I guess, my background.
Which is, I think that's just phenomenal what you guys are doing. It's, I always talk about with people that are in the recruiting space and people looking at the recruiting space, there's 1,000 ways to skin the cat. And I probably need to think of another phrase because I have three amazing cats that I love. Um, but when it comes down to it, I think like it's like the 1980s model of like just a placement fee, and that's the only way to do things. But you're sitting there talking about how your organization builds out solutions for those companies so that way they can build their teams fast, right?
Yeah, and so you have to think about this. You have to meet the client where they're at, right? Just because I want something doesn't necessarily mean one, they have grasped that that may be the better solution for them. They may be stuck in their old sort of ecosystem and knowledge and things that worked for them in the past. And so you have to provide them the solutions, but you also don't want to lose business. I'll add a caveat to that. You don't want to sell something that you don't want to do or it's not going to make you enough money, right? So you have to, there's a fine balancing act in those things.
So, like, looking at your career and looking at like how you've dealt with clients and how you've dealt as a recruiter, you know, as we talk about the shift of evolving yourself, what was the point that you realized that you had to evolve?
Well, well, first off, that's a tough question to answer, but I actually would say I had three different evolutions: one as a recruiter, one as a manager, and one as a business partner to these clients that I work with. And I would say each one of those have their own arcs and their own sort of storyline. But one of the biggest things that I found is that at least the clients that we work with, they just need a specific solution and they want someone who understands the market really well. And so what I was able to do early on, well, one of the things, for instance, when we originally started in the tech space, Anders would go to a whiteboard and we'd write out the tech stacks for different companies. We just whiteboarded and talk about how they interact with each other. And then we actually started digging in deeper and deeper. I would watch like 60 seconds on Kubernetes, 60 seconds on a variety of other things to just learn and evolve. And then the biggest piece is market knowledge. And I think this is where we as recruiters can do a better job to aggregating as much information and then making it digestible and relatable to the clients that we work with. And so many of the times that I would be involved, the first question, a Series B, how much equity do other companies give? How do they build it out? When do they, like, what are their vesting schedules look like? What are the salary ranges looking like right now? And that is sort of the evolution. And the more I got asked those questions, the more I started to retain and aggregate that information. That was pretty cool, at least to then all of a sudden be like, yeah, I'm the guy that knows these things. Come talk to me.
And it's funny, like once you start knowing those things and once the word starts getting out, it really starts helping build your reputation too.
Yeah, 100%. But I will say this, that we also sort of pigeonholed ourselves for a while and we're really working our way or almost digging our way out of sort of this really niche down, very specific, expensive tech solution to being like, hey, by the way, we did all these other things. You just don't know that we did them. And we're trying to sort of rebuild that almost.
Well, I mean, that's a fun evolution of a business is definitely just like, you know, what is the next chapter? What are you doing and all that stuff. So like, how are you guys now positioning that, like that change?
Yeah, well, so I don't know if you know Jesse Tinsley. You may or may not have heard of him, but he is the founder and owner of Job Mobs, who acquired us about 5 or 6 months ago, and also acquired the Recruiter.com brand. And what that really allowed us to do is really diversify all the solutions that we have. So now we can do payrolling. We could do contractors. We could do EORs. We can do a lot of different things. And now what we're really doing is going on this like sort of like, hey, on this big tour to past clients. By the way, we have other things. And sometimes it takes 2, 3, 4 conversations just for it to resonate with them that we're not just that one-stop shop anymore.
Well, and before we like dive into something else, I got a question. Like when you're sitting there talking with your future clients and potential clients, how do you talk about the different things that you do? Because I know a lot of recruiters only have one solution.
Yeah, it's a crazy concept. It's called listening. And really what we do is we listen for what the problems are, and then we make recommendations, right? And so I'll be honest with you, they don't always listen when we give them the recommendations. And so, but that's really what it boils down to is, I mean, we usually have an idea of what we want to present in those meetings, but doesn't always mean that that's really what it boils down to. And so being able to have really creative solutions that meet them and being flexible, I think that is really what it boils down to.
I absolutely love that because at least in the GovCon space, you have to, be flexible with some of your solutions just because the way like contracts work and how the government works and funding and all that stuff, like the nuances that like I have to understand that my clients are dealing with on a daily basis. So I absolutely love that. So when it comes down to, and I want to flip gears, the focus of this is how to become that true business partner. How do you become a true business partner with your clients?
And I'm going to tie this back to this evolution piece, right? And so
Mhm.
when I first started becoming a business partner, I was there and I was like on the recruiting side and I was like trying to push process and make sure that the recruiters are doing well. And what I ended up realizing, and well, I was told, it's my favorite story to tell, but I was with a client and the CTO of that company asked me in a meeting, an all hands, let's call it that, and said, "Hey, Justin, how would you solve this problem?" I said, "This is what I would have done. This is how I would have go about this, and that's the approach that I would push through in the back end." And he was like, "That's why I'm paying you to be here. So please start sharing this information with us." And I felt like I got kicked in the face. I was so embarrassed almost, right? Because I felt like I didn't really provide the service that they were requesting, but it also flipped my mindset in that moment that I do have something to offer. And the reason that I am working with all of these clients is because of very specific knowledge, and which is why me and my team are there. And so at that moment, I have watched other individuals also be sort of bulls like in China shops. They're like, this is what we need to do. This is how we do it. And what I really started to do is use anecdotal evidence to actually tell a really good story based on what I'm seeing in the market for other clients. Also, one of the things that I've identified specifically on the early stage startup side was that a lot of these leaders are under very, very intense pressure. They're under just incredible pressure from their VCs, from the boards, just from every single angle that you can imagine. And so what I started doing with my recruiters is really using data to empower our stakeholders and empower our champions with as much information on the progress and process that we're implementing so that they could constantly share that back when all of a sudden they're like, "Hey, we're spending money on this." I'm like, "Yeah, we're spending money on this, but guess what? By the time we're done, you're going to hire 19 engineers, and those 19 engineers are going to get you your next funding round." And so I really kind of evolved on my language on how I approached it. And the other piece that I did is I thought about what are the business challenges that they're going through, and how can I turn that language to the recruiting side to make myself more valuable to them and then be an asset more so than a liability.
I absolutely love that. Like when you're sitting there building these reports out for these clients, what are some of the things that you're highlighting? I know you mentioned talking about like getting closer to your next funding round, but like what are you highlighting to be able to help share that story?
That's yeah, great question. So by the way, this actually evolved with me sending an email out back in the day that would be like, this is who we have, this is where we're at, this is where we're going next, these are our challenges. And I used to send it out every Monday and then one at the end of the week, really to cover my ass, to be honest with you. That's kind of how it started. And then one of the things that we found is that we needed to add other components into it, like where are we getting hung up on? Where are we struggling with things? What's our current cost per hire? The other thing that I do nowadays that I've evolved into is when I go into an engagement, I look at our financials, I look at our budget, I look at our sort of stack ranking of recs and what we need to do, and then I offered my advice. I also then look at, hey, this is a salary range you're going after. This is what I know that's happening in the market on the interest rate. If you have no brand, it's going to be an uphill battle. How are we positioning ourselves? You currently only have 10 engineers. You want to hire 15. That means you can only realistically do 2 or 3 interviews a week. So I actually reverse engineer all of those pieces. And then I build that into a metric system. But fundamentally, what I found is that for the boards and the CEOs, they want to just know how close are we getting to these hires. And so it's really just funnel metrics in that sense. And then on the back end, I do a lot of other uh, budgeting and metrics and conversions and spreadsheets that we send and work through.
Well, so are you ever, do the clients that your team is dealing with, are you ever pulled into those board meetings and VC meetings?
No, but I get to prep a lot of documents for them. And so
Okay.
oftentimes that is on where are we falling short? What has been the market response to the product that we're building? So we capture that usually on the recruiting side. Also, where do we see the challenges? And then oftentimes on what do our comp packages look like and are they competitive? And so that's usually the conversation that I get to aggregate for them. And usually right before board meetings, all of a sudden it'll be like 10 p.m. I go to bed early, just so you know. At 10 p.m., they're like, can you get us this information by tomorrow morning? And I'm like, yes, of course. Because, it's so important to them in those moments. And recruiting is such a small function, but it's so crucial for them to really get to the next funding round. But also think about, we were working with a seed stage startup. They're looking to bring in a multinational conglomerate to build out a proof of concept. Hey, these people that we're hiring, they're going to allow you to make another 2 million like that. Right. And so it's when you pull yourself back just out of the recruiting piece, we have a huge impact on the bottom line of what's happening in an organization, but it isn't always perceived that way.
And I love this. There's just so much advice that you can like pick up on this because I see too often recruiters just they're order takers. Like even, rec management, even like the
I
intake
started there.
calls. We all did. But it's like you're looking at yourself as a consultant. And I believe whether you're external recruiter, internal recruiter, agency recruiter, your own search firm, like you can easily learn to be a solution provider, like what you're sitting there talking about. And at the level of service where like, it sounds like you've embedded yourself into their teams and you've become such a vital part of the process that like they can't survive without you.
That's what I try to accomplish, just so you know. I mean, for instance, I just had a new engagement that just kicked off, and the VP and the CTO were like, "Oh, just bring Justin back. He could actually help us with those things." And I sat down with this new hiring manager, and I'm like, "Hey, this is your process. This is how we do this. This is where we've fallen short. This is," and then we talked about comp ranges. I was like, "If you have this comp range, we're going to fill this fast. This comp range is going to take us a little bit longer." And so I just set up the foundation and the baseline right at the beginning so that we all know what to expect. And I think it's a good term, what is it? Under promise, over deliver. But I actually just be the, you're there for a reason and tell them why or why not, or what will be the problems. Just forecast it a bit. So that way there's like a true expectation that I'm here for you. I'm here to support you. And I have your best interest in mind. And I will save you time if you work with me and let me help you.
I love that so much. Well, and I want to kind of flip it into gears, like talking about a tech stack. So yes, yeah, you're sitting there building out you understand the business. You're helping the leaders, move forward with their organizations. You're helping with funding. You're helping with hiring. You're helping with this. But on the recruiting side of the house, you got to have a good tech stack to succeed, right?
100% accurate. And I'll start this conversation with, I've gone into so many environments and I always work with the tech stack that they have, but I also believe in having a secret sauce on the back end. And I will tell you, and this is actually, again, back when I joined Flawless. Flawless originally believed in automation and sort of, let's call it pre-AI, but we tried to increase our output significantly with doing less work. And so at the time, I was doing a lot of output, but not always as successful. And really, what I then learned is to hone in my strategy to be more strategic. So now my outreach is a lot less, but more fruitful, right? But when it comes to a tech stack, I believe in tools like Seek Out or other sourcing tools. And I also think the biggest challenge I find is that many recruiters that I've worked with, I've been fortunate to train like close to 100 recruiters in these last 4 years at Flawless. And there's sort of like a divide. It's people who are really good at doing their Boolean search and like, hey, this is like call 'em Boolean bingo, I guess. And then there's people who can kind of grasp this idea of being more of a strategic sourcer that actually looks at variables like what product did they build, when did they grow, what funding round were they at X amount of years, are they direct to consumer brand? Are they a back end component? And really then changing your sourcing strategy based on some of those market mappers, I guess. I don't know if that what is it, markers, I guess, or market markers, let's call it that.
Mhm.
And then some people, as soon as they get stressed, they'll fall back into their Boolean bingo thing. And then they ask themselves like, hey, why am I not producing? Why am I not getting the right candidates? It's because they haven't quite evolved to think about sourcing a little bit differently. So that's one piece. I also am a huge fan of Teamable. If you've never used Teamable, and they used to be called Top Funnel, And one of the cool things about them is they've evolved significantly since I started using them. But you can actually create these different projects and you can use an AI sentence. So it actually reads the LinkedIn profile and then actually says, hey, you've been at Oracle for 2 years working on distributed systems. Would love to chat with you about what we're doing. And then you have your standard text. It generally increases my response rate significantly. But also, what I get to do is sometimes I go into an environment and they're like, we want someone from Facebook that has worked on blah, blah, blah. Ideally, if they've come from Google. And I'm like, okay, cool. We'll find you those people. I drop those into a bucket, but then I will also add my thoughts or like my sourcing strategy into another one. What I can then do, I can actually break it down to the company that they work at, what their open rate, what their interest rate is, what their response rate is. And I can actually then go back to my hiring managers and the leadership team and say, I know you want these people, but they don't want you. And so you get to have a really good conversation around that because you have to be able to, I mean, we have to work fast, right? And so I was like, okay, so what trade-offs can we make in this search? And that's one of the reasons I absolutely love it. They're building lots of other cool features that I'm a big fan of. I have
So,
ADHD. I wanted to add also Rewind AI. If you've never used it, it records everything just on your hard drive and you could be like, what did I talk to Benjamin about? And then it'll pull it up.
oh, I love that. So yeah, I'm actually a huge fan of Seek Out myself. They have this like data set for the cleared space that is just absolutely amazing. But I'll check out Teamable. That just sounds amazing. And as somebody else that also has ADHD, and I'm constantly like squirrel, squirrel, squirrel. I'll look into Rewind AI also.
I'm like,
Well,
yes, you have to look into it because I'll tell you this, I will forget things. I'll remember this like that. Like I was like, I think we talked about it this, and this is what we talked about, but I can't always remember exactly what happened. And you can look, and the other piece is it will pull up meetings and even slides in those meetings, which is really cool.
well, and one thing I want to also talk about is like a lot of times in a company, or if you're working for a company, you're given a tech stack. This is a tech stack that you have. I sometimes believe that you have to, I hate to say this, either go find or maybe even go fund your own tech stack for your success. Like you have, I want you to kind of, you've played with everything. It sounds like, in the conversations that we had before we started, like, how do you design a tech stack that works for you?
Well, so I want to start by saying with a tech stack that works for me doesn't always work for everyone who works for me. And so there's been a few tools that I've used in the past where I was like, oh, this is incredible. But my adoption rate from my recruiters was next to none. And so I think that it's also important to then identify, to think about your business model and then say, who are my end users and how can I get them to use it? And so there's sort of trade-offs that you have to consider. We always show up with our own tech stack on the back end, and then we implement our tools into theirs. Sometimes it's a manual sort of upload of a CSV file. Sometimes we can connect it directly. It really depends on sort of let's call it like the data governance that those companies have. And so you have to then also decide, is this a high volume play? Is this a very specific, sometimes I go into GitHub and I do, profile matching with public profiles to make sure I hit the right people. Then you have to think about like, is this a government play? Do I just need like high volume salespeople? And we get to do a lot of these different things and those require different tools, in my opinion. And I would also say is I've also gotten many clients to change their tool stack. And then the other piece is I've built many of them out. I've built out Greenhouse, I've built out Workday, I've built out Lever. I've done them all at this point because you just have to help them and they don't know what they don't know.
That's so true. That is so true. Well, before we move on to the next part of the podcast, is there anything else that you would love to share about, being a true partner and a true consultant?
Yeah. And I think that is really kind of trying to figure out what the business needs are and really learning sort of what the pressures are that the client is facing, and then figuring out how to provide those solutions and learning how to translate those things. And I think one of my biggest superpowers oftentimes is not actually being really good at recruiting, but it's actually telling a good story about what needs to be accomplished and what they're trying to achieve, both on the recruiting side, but also for the stakeholder management component. And the last piece on the stakeholder management piece, learn how to work with people learn how to give them what they need and meet them where they're at. So sometimes, I'm a big slacker. Sometimes people need text. Sometimes they need to be a phone call. Some only want to do email, but set that expectation right at the beginning.
Awesome. Well, absolutely love this. Well, and we're going to move over to the quick fire
Oh,
questions. And real quick, when I say quick fire, it doesn't have to be a quick answer.
okay. Okay.
What advice would you give to a brand new recruiter that's just starting off in our industry?
Don't pretend like you know things. I don't know. My evolution was like pretending like I knew what I was talking about. Then to being like, I have no clue what's going on, to now just asking questions when I don't know. And I think we try to posture a lot. At least I did when I first started in recruiting, and it didn't necessarily make me a better recruiter. And then learn, talk to as many people as you can, talk to other recruiters, and then just have really good conversations with people and tell them to explain things to you. I'll tell you this, I've learned so much going into a call and be like, I have no idea what it is you actually do. Could you explain it to me? And are you the right person that I should be talking to? And they'll tell you. They'll just tell you. It's crazy.
It's awesome. Well, same question for like recruiters that have been around the block for a few years. What advice would you give to them to, have success or continued success?
Evolve and iterate. I think that some of the more senior recruiters that I've had the pleasure of working with, who've worked on assignments with me, again, there's two versions. One is they're just kind of stuck in their ways and they tend to not always perform at the same level as some other ones, or they're the ones who pick up some tools and maybe make them their own, figure out different sort of nuances to them, and they'll end up running circles around everyone because they have just such deep knowledge combined with tools that make them more productive and more precise. They just become absolute monsters. So that's probably my advice.
Great advice. Be an absolute monster.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, yes, got to hit it hard.
Share that one more time.
Oh, you want to do it one more
For,
time? So just so you
for
know,
the
you
other,
got to do a flick. You got to be like, oh, it's the
oh,
wrong side. You got to be like, here. And
I love that.
so, yeah, if you ever come to an indoor cycling class with me, I'm like, yes, with the beat. So that way people know when to hit.
Wait, so you're also a cycling instructor?
Yeah, I actually started that so I've been doing, I started training, doing group exercise classes, and I was like, okay, so listen to me. I want to be on stage with a microphone and everyone has to pay attention to me, and they have to listen to my music. What could I do to make that happen? And so I was like, indoor cycling instructor. That's how I got there.
I love that. That's awesome. I think you actually shared one of your videos recently on LinkedIn. I was like, that looked fun.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it is another thing. I was like, I'm pretty fun to be around when in those classes. But when you're around people who are really like, this is their craft, mm, just incredible of an experience.
Well, that's a kind of segues into a question that I have for you. Like, we're all very focused on what we do for a living as recruiters. How important is it to have something like high level outside of recruiting? And has that helped your career?
I have to have it. I'm a bit of a workaholic if I don't have something else to take me away from things. I'm also the guy that will just like have his phone always kind of ready just to like answer things. And so having something outside of recruiting is super, super crucial. I also catch myself, I'm always listening to like market updates. I'm a big believer of listening to what's happening in the market, what our business is doing. I listen to equity podcasts. And so I get so like 24/7 like involved. Your podcast, as soon as it drops, I'm listening, right? And so I'm just like always thinking about it, and having something that forces me to listen to music, to create an experience, to take me to other places, has been really good for my soul.
Awesome. I love that. So, what is a book that has had a huge impact on your career?
I was so afraid of this question because I'll tell you why. So I've been an Audible member since 2016, and I listen to books nonstop. It's just like, you just kind of do it. And so there's different times in my life with different evolutions. And what was interesting as things got really hard in the market, there's the book called Hard Things from Andreessen Horowitz. And it was just like a good reminder, like, hey, life ain't always rosy, and you have to really identify opportunities and make some tough decisions to really persevere. And the question is, how willing are you to really kind of grind through some of the downsides? And so I just thought it was a really interesting book for the current times that we're in.
I'll definitely check that out. And man, I am the biggest fan of Audible. Like I'm a runner. Throwing that into my sunglasses, I have like the Bose sunglasses that play music
Yep.
on them. Throwing a book onto my watch, go run and listen to a book. Good 5 miles, good reset of the day, great learning opportunity. I think I have like something like 400 or 500 books on Audible. Kind of sick.
Yeah, and what was interesting, there's some management books, like, when it came to, like, how do you manage remote teams? It was so different, and I'd never met some of these people, and so there's some incredible books and there's, like, I think, like, 5 or 6 that I'm not gonna rattle them all off, but it's just, like, in the moment, you can find something that will resonate with you, especially when you have those credits racked up.
For the future of recruiting, what's your thoughts on recruiting and artificial intelligence?
First off, I love AI. I think it's one of the coolest things ever. I try to, like, build as much automation into my life as possible because the more real conversations I get to have with people, the more of a consultant I can be, right? And so if now I can get it transcribed and I have my whole write up ready and I know exactly what I want to say, like, that's phenomenal. The same with Reclaim. All my calendars, I generally have 4 or 5 different calendars that I manage that are just mine. Those will all get combined into one, and I can build my to-do lists into that. We'll also move my to-do list into openings based on my due date. So it allows me to stay on top of things specifically with my ADHD. And I think what I've been seeing, and I've been in some really cool enterprise conversations with TA leaders. I think, we have a traditional TA outsourcing that I think will somewhat be of a boom in 2024. I think we've also saw the kind of evolution into like talent operations. And I think we'll see another layer into the talent analytics side, which is sort of a combination of the things that we've been doing already. But I think we'll start seeing very strategic um, recruiting strategies being implemented, and more so than just this, let's call it willy nilly that we've seen in the past. And so kind of saying like, hey, if who, if we're reaching out to people at X company, what's the likelihood that they will do well in our organization? Are they interested? And then what is the quality of hire going to be in the long term of those things? And so I think we're going to start seeing a lot more metrics because of the new tools that are being introduced to become more important. And I think it's exciting, but we got to always remember that metrics, tools, and all those things don't really replace a great experience and a great human connection.
Mhm. I absolutely love that. And real quick, you mentioned this thing called Reclaim. What's that?
Oh, yeah. So it's reclaim.ai, I think, and it's a scheduling tool. It's kind of like Calendly, but what I can do is, I work with different clients, sometimes 4 or 5 clients, sometimes more, sometimes less. But you actually can combine all of them so that you just have your one master schedule. And when someone's busy, when like someone is scheduled on one of your calendars, it will only show availability based on your master calendar. So it all funnels to one. I don't miss anything. Nothing gets double booked. No one can schedule over things. And then the other piece for me is like, I've tried everything on to-do lists. Like I've write it out. I've created the little thingies. I forget as soon as I write it down. I'll be honest with you. And so what I found is I needed like something. So it actually connects into my calendar, like a to-do list, and it then drops them into openings. And if I don't complete it, it moves it to the next opening. So I don't have to move anything. It just does it for me. And I'm a big fan of that.
Awesome. Well, that kind of goes into the next question. Like you can say that it was already one of the tools, but do you have a favorite rec tech tool that you love?
I love a few of them for different reasons. So I'm a big fan of Teamable. I would say that's probably my number one thing. I love Seek Out just for the ability that allows me. Also, I wanted to, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. The data that I get to pull to go into meetings, super important to have that access. I also love a tool called Hone It. Hone It is an audio capturing tool. And what it does is you can, one, it's good for when you're doing larger scale components, but also if you're working like with really technical things, you could say something like, hey, hey, hiring manager, give me like a really technical question that will let you determine whether or not this person's worth talking to. And I actually then say in the interview, I'm like, hey, can you, I was like, I'm not going to know really the answer to this, but I'm going to send this to the hiring manager. So please, this is who your target audience is. And then I click record, and then it records that segment, and then it uses AI to summarize it. And I can send that recording and that piece to them. And what I can do now is I can save my hiring manager those 30 minutes for someone that could potentially be good, or did they really answer that question the way that you want to? And so when it comes to saving hiring manager time, very specific things. Also, you got me going. Also, what's kind of cool about it is you can create these call guides. And what you can do with that, you can actually then send them out to your different teams. And so that way it stays consistent and you're not missing anything. For high volume pieces and for very specific niche things, it's pretty powerful.
Awesome. Absolutely love that. For looking at you personally, Justin, what do you think has been a huge contributor to your own success?
Well, on the superficial side, I've been very fortunate to be getting acquainted, connected with some incredible TA leaders, I guess, people who have had vision, who had foresight to really kind of help me grow and allow me to mess up at times. But when it comes down to sort of like on the personal side, I moved to the United States when I was 15. I didn't, my mother is still in Germany. She has her own issues. And I ended up leaving my father's house at 16. And so I really never had a choice, I guess, right? There was only one option, which is you either work and you make shit happen, or you don't eat, or you don't have a place to live. And so you kind of work your way through those things and really looking at opportunities and then taking them and not being afraid to just kind of jump in and see what happens.
I absolutely love that. And it looks like you definitely jumped on a great opportunity with Flawless.
Yeah, I mean, there's also, I mean, the list is long of the people who I've gotten to work with here, but it's also just being like a sponge, right? Like just absorbing. And I think the other thing is every time I do something, I'm like, how can I take this and then either improve it? How can I take this information, take it to the next environment? What would have changed about it? Right. And then also talking about it with other people. Like, hey, what would you have done? How do you approach this? Because I don't have to know all the answers. I just have to like come back with some solutions.
It's kind of funny that you mentioned that. Like I have people like that reach out to me because of the podcast. Say, hey, what's your thoughts on this? And I'm like, how about you check out Justin Wade's podcast? How do you check out Crystal Parker's podcast? Like, I'm always like, these are the experts.
Yeah. But it's so hard because like I'll say like specifically not so I think the community is starting to build in the TA space. But it was like a you versus me thing for a long time. And when you come from an original agency background, it was like, be careful, someone going to steal your money if you're not careful, right? And that was the other thing that I loved about when I joined Flawless. It didn't matter. We're all just going to make money anyway, and we're going to support each other. I keep saying, giving me a thing, but that's really what we focused on, and that's what I think is super important now. And you're doing such a good job about bringing people together.
And I think that's so cool where you guys are all working together. Cause I remember my first experience in the agency world. Like I never went into sales. I stayed in the recruiting side of the house, but I opened up this large account, and this account ended up pulling in millions of dollars into Aerotech. And they completely like redrew my district and cut me away from that account that I staffed up and then I had to train a recruiter on how to do everything with that account. And they made all the money. I was like, I'm over this.
Yeah. And then you, even when you bring something in, they're like, well, this should actually be part of telecom. This should be part of this. And so all of a sudden you only get allocated a fraction of it. And you're like, what the, like anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. That's another day for another story. And that's
Yeah,
why we are growing our own journeys.
that's right.
Well, and flipping gears, Justin, this is actually one of my favorite questions. If you could go back and, actually, I'm going to ask this two ways because you're like a late bloomer to the recruiting role. If you could go back to like shortly out of college or your first like entry into your career, sit down with yourself, have a cup of coffee, what advice would you give yourself then?
Don't take yourself too serious and find your own voice. And I think all too often when I work with younger recruiters, they're very rigid in the way that they think they need to be presenting themselves. And people like to do business and work with people who feel genuine. And that takes time to get comfortable into your own skin, I guess. And so I always tell people when I write an email, I sound just the way I talk because I don't want you to be confused that I'll sound different. It's just a chill conversation. I think that would be the biggest thing. And one thing that even in my recruiting, it took me a time to learn time blocking. If I could have figured out time blocking in the first like 2 or 3 years of doing this, my life would have been way better. And it took me, by the way, it took me like 5 different people to tell me to time block. We're all very senior in this ecosystem. Do you think I could do it? No. And I was like, the faster you could figure that out, the more productive and the more efficient you're going to be.
It took you a few years. I think it took me about 12 to 15 years in recruiting before I realized it. Cause like my problem is ADHD. Like a scroll goes by. It sometimes takes me like 20 minutes to reset.
But you know what I also found is you have to be specific in your time blocking. You can't say source. You have to say, I'm
No.
going to source on this, or I'm going to close out this. I'm going to write that contract. Because if I say contracts, I ain't going to write any contract because then I'm going to be like, oh, what contracts do I have to do? How do you write contract? You know what I mean? Like it doesn't work otherwise for me.
All right. And we're flipping the same question. But if you're sitting down with yourself at the very beginning of your recruiting career, what additional advice would you give yourself?
Appreciate the fundamentals. Appreciate the fundamentals uh, and try to hone them a bit better at the beginning. There was a time where I think there's an arc, at least, I don't know how most people, but I was like, WTF, what did I get myself into here? Why am I doing this? Like, this is weird. To, wow, I'm God's gift to the earth. I'm phenomenal at this. To, I don't think I know what I'm doing and that's okay. Right. And so I think there's this weird arc that sort of happens. But one of the biggest challenges that I find with people that I've worked with, um, that don't have really strong fundamentals back to the basics tends to have a bit of a harder time no matter what environment you go into. It doesn't matter if you go to an early stage startup, if you go to a high volume, if you go do whatever, you have to know your fundamentals because that's what's going to carry you through to the end. And so honing in on those a bit better would be my advice to myself.
Awesome. Phenomenal. Well, Justin, before I let you go, is there anything else that you would love to share with the listeners?
Yeah, I do actually. And I think really is be a student of your craft and hone your skill. Things that work today won't work tomorrow, and you continuously have to evolve and you have to learn what other groups are doing, what other people are doing, what other service offerings there could be. Because we get so stuck on this one idea and this is how we do it. But in reality, how do you say you can slice a cat 1,000 ways? And so, and also one of the other things is look at maybe not things in your niche. How are they solving those problems? And that is something that I think is something to look into further.
I think definitely great advice. Well, Justin, I just wanted to say thank you for coming on the podcast. I've been seeing what you've been doing online, like helping level up the community, and wanted you to kind of share that. Just because, my God, if I learned how to be a true business partner early on in my career, it probably could have fast forwarded my career so much farther, so much earlier. And and it's not something that they really teach you in your like 2-week onboarding training when you become a recruiter. So,
Nope.
uh, but yeah, once again, Justin, I want to say thank you for helping level up the entire community. And for the listeners, hey, let's crush it this year, guys.
Thank you so much.